Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Love and Life, the channel where we share knowledge for holistic self-development through great books. If you dare to divorce me, you'll never see your child again. If you marry them, don't call me your father anymore. If you leave me, I can't live. If you can't work overtime with the team, I might have to reconsider your promotion. Do these statements sound familiar? In reality, we have all, more or less, experienced or witnessed similar situations. The noteworthy thing is that these words often come from the people closest to us, our partners, parents, friends, or colleagues. They might just be trying to do what's best for you in their own way, but end up causing you to live in misery. Or they might be using the name of love to control your life. Susan Forward, a renowned psychotherapist and New York Times best-selling author, has given this phenomenon a name: emotional blackmail. This phrase translates directly to emotional extortion, but the extortion here isn't about kidnapping a loved one for money. It's about using emotions as a hostage, turning your fear and sense of obligation into the most sophisticated weapons to demand your absolute submission. Because the people you care about most are also the ones who understand your greatest weaknesses. The person closest to you has the ability to push you into a protracted emotional war. That is the essence of emotional manipulation. This week's book, Emotional Blackmail by Susan Forward, is a classic in the field of psychology. It helps you clearly identify the signs of this type of manipulation, understand how it operates, and learn how to respond. It will help you restore trust, break the cycle of manipulation and compliance, and finally, escape the maze of a toxic relationship. This book is for anyone who feels lost or hurt in their most intimate relationships, the very places that should be your sanctuary. Now, let's dive into today's content: diagnosing emotional manipulation, the kind that holds your weaknesses hostage. What is emotional manipulation, hostage-taking? First, I'll use the term emotional manipulation instead of emotional blackmail to make it easier to understand. But we need to implicitly understand that the emotional manipulation here is when the other person has grasped your weakness, taken it hostage, and turned it into a condition to force you to obey them. Usually, this type of manipulation exists in a direct, threatening form that we can easily recognize. For example, if you leave me, don't expect to see the kids again. If you can't provide for your little brother, don't call us your parents anymore. The manipulator's goal is clear: use consequences to force submission. However, the majority of cases are more subtle, hidden beneath the harmonious surface of a close relationship. Good memories, initial care, and the titles of love and family create a fog, preventing you from realizing the control that is gradually creeping in. The other person crosses healthy boundaries, pushing you into reluctant compromises under implicit pressure. Author Susan Forward has summarized the phenomenon of emotional manipulation, holding weaknesses hostage, into 6 characteristic stages. To better understand how this process plays out in real life, let's look at a specific example. Lan had been working non-stop all week, often working overtime. Sunday was her only day to rest completely. However, her husband, Dung, placed a heavy emphasis on family activities, always wanting the whole family to go out every weekend. One day, feeling exhausted, Lan gently told her husband, "I'm really worn out this week. Can we just stay home and rest on Sunday? Or maybe just take a walk nearby?" Dung replied, "I know you're tired, but I'm tired too. Going out is also a way to relax and rest. However, Lan knew full well that this going out entailed a long chain of troublesome preparations, while her body was already aching. She tried to hold her ground. I'm just too tired. I really don't want to go anywhere. Dung began to increase the pressure. He completely ignored Lan's feelings and switched tactics. I already promised the kids we'd go out this weekend. If you change your mind now, they'll be so sad. We can't be parents who break their promises. And what about my parents? If they find out, they definitely won't be happy. Hearing this, Lan felt tormented. She told herself that her husband just wanted what was best for the children, and it was true that they shouldn't break a promise. Despite her body screaming in exhaustion, she reluctantly agreed to go. But the trip brought no joy or relaxation. It only worsened her physical condition. And this scenario didn't just happen once. Afterward, Dung continued to use similar reasoning to force Lan to participate in family activities, regardless of her physical state or need for rest. To an outsider, Lan and Dung's interaction might seem completely normal, even seen as a sign of family care. But behind those seemingly reasonable and well-intentioned words, a sequential process of emotional manipulation was taking place, following the 6 stages identified by the author in this book. Stage 1, the demand. In any relationship, it's common for one person to express a desire and ask the other to comply. However, in Lan's situation, Dung's desire to go out for the weekend was no longer a suggestion or an idea, but an implicit command, leaving no room for discussion or other options. Stage 2, resistance. When faced with an unsuitable demand, the other person has every right to say no, just as Lan refused because she was too tired. This resistance is a need for freedom and a way to protect personal boundaries. It's a natural human instinct, but in reality, if not reinforced by clear awareness, this resistance is often very weak. Stage 3, pressure. This action quickly follows. The manipulator often uses arguments that sound reasonable to persuade the other person. For instance, Dung said he was also tired, but still saw the outing as a way for both of them to relax. On the surface, this shows empathy, but it's actually a way to force Lan to dismiss her personal feelings and submit to his desire. Stage 4, threats. This is when they escalate if the pressure doesn't work. They will use the other person's deep-seated weaknesses to create more leverage. Dung knew Lan valued her image in the eyes of her children and in-laws, so he issued a morally charged warning. If she broke her promise, the children would be disappointed and the grandparents wouldn't be happy. These words aren't an overt threat, but they strike at her psyche, making Lan feel guilty. Stage 5, capitulation, giving in. Once guilt overpowers reason, Lan enters this stage. Even knowing the request is unreasonable and unfair to herself, she reluctantly agrees. This acceptance doesn't come from a place of willingness, but is the result of being emotionally cornered. As repeated capitulations accumulate, conflict and arguments in the relationship become inevitable, and both will end up hurting each other more and more. Stage 6, repetition. The cycle restarts. Over time, the conflict may subside and the relationship returns to a state of stability. However, the manipulation cycle will begin all over again. A new demand is made, followed by the same sequence of resistance, pressure, threats, and capitulation, repeating endlessly. Recognizing the 4 tactics of emotional manipulators. In reality, most people caught in this spiral are unaware they are being emotionally manipulated. It's like a fog clouds our vision, leaving us struggling with the very person we love most. The author says that to lift this fog, you must understand the manipulator's tactics, behaviors, and psychology. Typically, there are 4 behavioral tactics for emotional manipulation. 1. Binary, all or nothing. Thinking. Binary thinking is seeing everything in 2 opposite extremes: right or wrong, good or bad, black or white, with no room for gray areas. In the emotional manipulator's eyes, if you are not completely on their side, you are against them. If you don't do as they wish, you will be labeled as uncaring, disloyal, or unloving. For example, Lynn's new husband often complained when she went out to see her friends. "If you really loved me, you'd spend more time with me." What kind of married woman keeps going out on her own? At first, Lynn tried to balance her relationships, but gradually she began to feel guilty every time she left the house. Eventually, she turned down all invitations, fearing she'd be labeled as indecent. This is a classic example of binary thinking. Either she is a wife 100% devoted to her husband, or she is an untrustworthy wife. There is no room for compromise or legitimate personal needs. This kind of thinking isn't based on reason, but on emotional control. It backs the person into a corner where all resistance is labeled as wrong. Once trapped in this black and white zone, the person being manipulated doesn't dare to say no, fearing they'll be seen as the bad one. The truth is, loving someone doesn't mean losing your own world. A healthy relationship always leaves room for one's own colorful sky, where both people can be themselves and respect each other's differences. 2. Pathologizing. In relationships, we sometimes disagree with others. This is perfectly normal. However, the emotional manipulator turns this difference into a sign of mental instability. They don't accept that the other person has separate needs or perspectives. Instead, they attribute it to past trauma, a fear of commitment, or some underlying psychological problem. For example, Nga and Hung were dating. Hung constantly tried to meet Nga and wanted to be close all the time. But one time, Nga requested some private time in the evenings, saying they didn't need to be together all day. Hung immediately reacted. "People in love always want to be together. Why can't you open up to me? Is it because you were hurt or betrayed in the past, and now you're keeping your distance? You need to get therapy." After hearing this once or twice, Nga didn't think it was a big deal, as she knew she had no such trauma. But gradually, Nga began to doubt herself. Am I really a cold, damaged person who doesn't know how to love? This is a form of manipulation by pathologizing emotions, turning a natural reaction into a sign of illness to make the other person lose self-confidence and thus comply with all demands without the ability to resist. 3. Enlisting allies, creating factions. When their own reasoning isn't strong enough, some people will turn to a crowd to create pressure. For example, Khan, a man in his 30s, was constantly nagged by his wife because he wouldn't agree to buy a house near her parents. Instead of finding a solution together, she invited her mother over to talk. His mother-in-law, not even 5 minutes into her visit, said, "What kind of son-in-law doesn't think about filial piety?" Other husbands spoil their wives, but you get difficult over a small suggestion. Khan felt isolated in his own home. No matter what he said, he was seen as uncaring and irresponsible. His feelings were drowned out by the voices of the other side, which included his wife, his mother-in-law, and their prejudiced views. When truth is obscured by emotion and factions, the person in the middle easily loses their own voice. 4. Negative comparisons. Every one of us has, at least once, been compared to a friend, a sibling, a colleague, or some vague ideal person. These seemingly harmless comparisons, if repeated, will eat away at self-esteem, making the listener feel they are never good enough. Ms. Han's child just started working and already sent money home to buy a refrigerator. And you're always complaining you have no money. Thu constantly heard things like this from her mother. She gradually felt she was unfilial and useless and had to try twice as hard to keep up with her peers. Comparison is one of the most subtle forms of emotional manipulation. The manipulator doesn't need to use harsh words. They just need to name someone else and ask, "Why can't you be like them?" to instill a sense of inferiority and guilt. Why do we fall for it? So why do we suffer? Why are we helpless against these demands? And what kind of person is easily manipulated? First, we need to stop and think. When emotional manipulation occurs, who is responsible? Should we solely condemn the manipulator? The answer is no. Responsibility also lies with the person being manipulated, because emotional manipulation is never a one-sided act. In fact, the existence of a manipulator is always tied to the reaction of the manipulated. That is, your reactions and thoughts contribute to the manipulation being inflicted upon you. This doesn't mean to criticize the victim as being at fault. The core point is that it's time for us to look at ourselves in this suffocating relationship. We may have shouted, but not loudly enough. Initially, not realizing you're being manipulated isn't your fault. In an intimate relationship, people often let down all their defenses. When we're in love, we believe the other person's demands come from love and care. But when the manipulator makes harsh and unreasonable demands, and we remain silent, agree, or give in, that is the mistake. We often fantasize that giving in will bring peace and affection from the other person. But does that really happen? The answer is no. When the person who wants your total obedience discovers this method is highly effective, they will continue to make demands in the future. And once they've grasped your weakness, it's very difficult for them to let go of the hostage that gives them absolute control. So, what are the weaknesses within you that are easily held hostage? It is fear, obligation, and guilt. FOG. Those closest to you always understand what you fear most. You might fear loss, fear they will abandon you or stop loving you. You fear losing the sense of familiarity, fear losing the reputation of a happy family, fear losing your job, or fear losing everything you've worked for. You also fear being criticized as an irresponsible person. This sense of obligation is something society highly values, something you've been taught since childhood, that you must be responsible for your parents, family, children, and community. And the feelings of responsibility and guilt always go hand in hand. When you are accused of not being responsible enough, guilt makes you believe you are the cause of all unhappiness. You then accept self-sacrifice to fix your mistake for them. Even if you know you're on a path that deviates completely from your own, you still don't want to admit you chose the wrong person or the wrong thing. The mix of fear, obligation, and guilt creates a mental vortex that makes you increasingly confused, falling into a state of self-blame, torment, and losing yourself. But no matter how scared you are, don't forget, if it hurts, you need to scream. Please stop blaming yourself. You need to speak up for the self within you that needs to be loved. Say, I am in pain. I am uncomfortable with these demands and labels from my loved ones. Look directly at your own fear. Examine whether you are living as and becoming a person who is easily manipulated. The author has analyzed 4 types of people who are very easily manipulated. Type 1. The people pleaser, craving approval. Fearing criticism and being seen as not good enough, many people constantly seek praise and try to please others. But this very thing makes you live according to the other person's evaluations and afraid to refuse. Type 2. The peacekeeper. Fearing conflict and confrontation, many people choose silence and endurance to keep the peace. But this is only a false peace. It causes you to be steamrolled and to accumulate negative emotions. Type 3. The self-blamer. Do you feel you need to shoulder everything, to be responsible for everyone's problems, even things that aren't yours? This mentality makes you easy to exploit and leaves you spiritually exhausted. Type 4. The self-doubter. Lacking self-confidence, many people easily believe others' judgments rather than their own. They frequently ask, am I wrong? Am I not good enough? And end up losing their inner voice. When you don't believe in yourself, you make it easy for others to lead and manipulate you. Therefore, we must be clearly aware of our own psychology and behavior. It's time for you to save yourself from this manipulative spiral. How to respond to emotional manipulation. So, what are the specific ways to respond? When you discover you are being manipulated and understand why you are susceptible, is the first thing to do to bravely leave? Is that the best way? Many people might think of a plan to leave and let go, but this book does not advise us to do that. You can create physical distance from the other person, but if you haven't closed the distance with your own soul, leaving is just a temporary escape. If you still feel weak, useless, and still live according to one of the 4 lifestyles above, relying on others for validation, afraid of the next relationship, then ending the relationship is just your way of expressing disappointment, anger, and punishing the person who manipulated you. However, using punishment as a response will never bring peace to your mind. Therefore, to cope with emotional manipulation, understanding your own psychology isn't enough. You must also thoroughly understand the psychology of the manipulator. The psychology behind the emotional manipulator is often a fear of losing and a desire to punish. They see love as a win-lose game. They must win. Therefore, they must be tough, and others must obey them completely for them to feel respected. If the other person doesn't comply, the feeling of losing makes them need to punish someone. They might find ways to punish you, threatening to leave or cut ties. They might also punish themselves. That's why we often see people who, when they don't get what they want, find ways to self-harm, even threatening or thinking about death. We see in the manipulator an ego that is too large, too selfish. But as Susan Forward says, those who appear strongest are, in fact, the weakest. From this perspective, the manipulators are actually pitiful. Most manipulators are children with deep wounds from their past. There's a saying, What does it mean to overcome an emotional lesson in this life? Growth after a relationship isn't about being able to easily end it, but about being able to face yourself and face the other person. Sometimes the best solution is to respond with an eye of empathy and forgiveness for the person involved. This book doesn't offer a fixed method, as every situation and relationship has its own unique characteristics. However, the author has proposed 4 common strategies you can refer to. Strategy 1: non-defensive communication. If the manipulator says, "You're so selfish, you don't think about the common good," and you reply, "You're the one who's selfish," this direct rebuttal is still defensive. This type of communication will easily cause emotions to explode on both sides, making the conversation tense. The key here is, when facing manipulation, to escape the tension, escape the emotional trap, and restore your own composure. This is the best way to change yourself. Therefore, don't rush to object. You can say, "I'm sorry for making you angry. I understand how you feel. We should sit down and talk about this." Or, "It's true, I have a part in this. Let's figure this problem out together." Communicating in this non-defensive way helps you bring reason back into the conversation. Strategy 2: enlisting them as an ally. When you feel stuck, an effective way to untangle the situation is to invite the other person to solve the problem with you. Instead of arguing and resisting, shift the conversation by seeking help, asking for advice, or suggesting they think of a solution together. You can try asking questions like, "Can you help me understand why this is so important to you?" Or, "Can you tell me why you feel so angry or upset?" Or, "Mom/Dad, what do you think we should do to solve this?" You can also spark curiosity. "I was wondering if you could help me find a solution." By being curious together, you are engaging their imagination. This not only creates a lighter feeling, but also helps both sides enter an open dialogue that isn't confrontational. People don't like to be blamed, but they are often very willing to help others find solutions if invited sincerely. When they are involved in the decision-making process, they will tend to be more supportive and cooperative. That's a natural human reaction. Strategy 3: bartering, negotiating. Faced with selfish demands from an emotional manipulator, you might feel indignant and miserable. But please remember, others will only change when you are willing to change. Therefore, change a little. Be softer. Don't resist so forcefully. This doesn't mean you need to capitulate completely. Rather, it aims for a strategy where both sides share responsibility, instead of just one person carrying the entire burden. For example, when a boss wants an employee to skip their vacation to stay and work, the employee can reply, "I understand your expectations, and I value this job. But this time, I've already made a promise to my family. I can come back a little early and shorten my vacation. But I also hope that next time you need me, you can let me know earlier so I can prepare better." This kind of bartering is how you establish clear boundaries with that person, while also respecting your own feelings. Strategy 4: using humor. Nothing makes us feel closer to each other than sharing a laugh. Humor is the thread that connects people. For example, a husband often sits watching football and is lazy about housework. Whenever his wife gently reminds him, he says, "I work hard all day to support this family. Can't I even get a little rest when I get home? Do you want me to work myself to death before you're satisfied?" This is a type of emotional manipulation. turning a shared responsibility into a burden, making the wife feel like she's forcing her husband, making her feel guilty or resentful. Instead of arguing back, she smiles, brings out a handmade paper trophy with the words, "World's longest seated athlete" on it. She presents it to him with a serious face, as if at an award ceremony, and says, "Congratulations on breaking the 2-hour continuous football watching record without standing up." The audience is very impressed with this performance. They would both burst out laughing. The husband would be embarrassed but wouldn't feel criticized. Afterward, he might voluntarily do the dishes and ask his wife if she wants to go for a walk. In this situation, the humor comes from the light-hearted role-playing, using a joke to reflect a real problem instead of choosing confrontation or mutual hurt. Humor not only reduces tension, but also creates an opportunity for change to occur more naturally. A final message to the hostages. Those are the ways to respond to emotionally manipulative behaviors. And finally, I have a few words for the hostages currently being held. Love is supposed to be a sanctuary we return to, but it often becomes the place that hurts us the most. When love is twisted into a tool of control, when intimacy is exploited for manipulation, we easily fall into an emotional maze where trust, sacrifice, and guilt overlap, making us unable to distinguish between real love and disguised bondage. Today's book gives us practical knowledge to recognize the tactics of emotional manipulation. It also helps us reflect on our own psychology and behavior, as well as that of the other person. From there, we can step by step regain mastery over our lives with clarity, peace, and completeness. You need to firmly believe that you do not need to trade compliance or capitulation to get love. You deserve to be loved, starting with being true to yourself and knowing how to love yourself. Because when you live with your own inherently complete, loving self, the fears, the attachments, and the expectations will naturally drift away. Others will no longer be able to take any hostages from you to manipulate or control. Escaping this kind of hostage-taking, emotional blackmail doesn't necessarily mean getting angry or leaving immediately. What's most important is that you learn how to love others without losing yourself. Learn to maintain your clarity and reason, and learn to let go of both the fear of loss and the need for approval. I hope that today's sharing will help you begin to untie the knots in your heart. And finally, my wish for you. I wish you peace on your journey back to yourself. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who need it. Don't forget to give me a like, hit the subscribe button, and turn on the notification bell to catch the newest videos every week. Thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next video.